It's the 20th of the month. You open your banking app, and something happens in your chest before your eyes even process the number. That's not anxiety. That's not weakness. That's a 200,000-year-old alarm system misfiring in a world it was never designed to handle. And the longer you don't know what it is, the more it costs you. You work, you earn, you tell yourself this month will be different, and then, somewhere between the first paycheck and the last week of the month, the money just disappears. Not stolen, not lost, spent, on things you don't fully remember wanting. And here's what makes that painful in a specific way. You're not bad at math. You know what subtraction means. The problem isn't arithmetic, it's biology. And specifically, it's a piece of software running underneath every financial decision you make that was written long before money existed. Inside the base of your skull, silently processing every time your bank balance changes, there's a mechanism that was coded during a period when your ancestors were hunting across the African savanna. And that mechanism has one governing rule. When resources appear, consume them immediately, because tomorrow they might be gone. That program kept your family line alive for millennia. Today, it is the exact reason you can't explain where your paycheck went. Here's what behavioral finance researchers discovered that almost nobody teaches in school. Your brain doesn't process your bank balance as a number. It processes it as a resource, a vulnerable one. And when a resource appears in the environment of a primitive brain, one signal overrides everything else: consume it before someone else does. Your ancestors had no refrigerators, no savings accounts. When the tribe found a kill on the savannah, everyone ate until there was nothing left. Storing calories wasn't an option. Restraint in that environment was a death sentence. That same biological wiring is now interpreting your direct deposit. The moment money hits your account, a quiet neurological countdown begins. An internal alarm that says, this resource is available. Acquire, spend, consume now. And here is where it gets darker. The companies that want your money have known about this mechanism for decades. They have entire departments, billions of dollars in research, dedicated to one thing: activating that primitive alarm before your rational brain has time to react. Let's talk about dopamine. Most people think dopamine is the pleasure chemical. That's not quite accurate. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It fires not when you receive something, but the moment you decide you're about to. This is why the Add to Cart button exists before you even need to check out. Why scrolling through a product page registers in your brain as hunting. Why that notification about a limited time offer creates a physical urgency that has nothing to do with whether you need the item. The click, the ad, the checkout, that entire sequence is 200,000 years of hunter-gatherer psychology being activated by people who studied your neurons for a living. And here's the feedback loop that makes this genuinely dangerous. The purchase creates an immediate chemical reward. The financial consequence arrives 3 to 5 days later when the emotional context is completely gone. Your primitive brain never connects the dopamine hit to the account balance. To your limbic system, those are two separate events, two separate lifetimes almost. This is what behavioral finance calls the temporal discount problem. The pleasure is immediate and sharp. The cost is delayed and abstract. A brain wired for the savannah will always choose immediate over abstract, every time, without exception. It's not a personal failure, it's a calibration. Which means something important. If you've been blaming willpower, you've been using the wrong tool. Trying to fight a biological drive with discipline is like trying to hold back a river with your hands because someone told you that strong people can do it. You'll exhaust yourself, and the river doesn't care. Here is the reframe that actually changes the math. The modern financial system was designed for a brain that didn't evolve yet. The one-click checkout, the buy now, pay later, the countdown timer that says only 3 left in stock. These aren't conveniences. They are precision mechanisms aimed at the part of your brain that still believes it's standing in tall grass, watching a resource disappear. Your spending problem isn't a character flaw. It's a targeting problem. You're the prey, and until now, your nervous system didn't know it. Most people, when they hear this for the first time, feel something strange, relief, because the guilt starts to shift. It was never about weakness. It was about being unaware that you were in the middle of a hunt and that you were the one being hunted. But here's where the relief needs a hard edge. Understanding the biology doesn't fix the behavior automatically. Knowing there's a predator in the field doesn't make you faster. It just makes you smarter about where you walk. The brutal money psychology data. The average person in their 30s spends roughly 15% more per month than they consciously intend to. Not on vacations, not on big purchases, on micro decisions, the subscription that seemed free, the cart that was already half full, the today-only offer that triggered a fear of missing out older than written language. On a $4,000 monthly income, that's $600 disappearing into impulse spending every single month. Over a decade, redirected into a high-yield savings account, that gap is the difference between financial pressure and actual breathing room. Not from one big decision, from interrupting a slow, invisible leak that your primitive brain has been running on autopilot for years. The most dangerous version of this is impulse spending on credit, because now you're not just consuming today's resources, you're promising tomorrow's to yesterday's dopamine hit. Your primitive brain doesn't understand future promises. It doesn't process debt. As far as your limbic system is concerned, you successfully acquired a resource. The bill is someone else's problem, a future version of you that doesn't biologically exist yet. I want you to think about what that trajectory looks like compounded. Not the person who overspends occasionally, the person who never interrupts the cycle, who earns more and spends exactly that more, who hits 40 still wondering why consumer behavior hasn't changed even as the salary did. That person is not unlucky. That person is running cave software on a modern financial operating system and wondering why the numbers don't add up. The primitive brain, left uninterrupted, doesn't build wealth. It metabolizes it. So here is the neural delay protocol, and it is simple by design because it has to be. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain capable of planning, of understanding abstract consequences, of seeing a future that doesn't exist yet, operates on a completely different timeline than the limbic system. Your primitive brain fires in milliseconds. The prefrontal cortex needs time to come fully online. So you give it time. For any purchase above $50 that was not pre-planned, one rule applies. Wait 72 hours before completing the transaction. No spreadsheet, no guilt, no self-punishment. You insert time between the dopamine trigger and the payment. That's the entire intervention. Here's what happens in those 72 hours on a neurological level, not a motivational one. The cortisol spike that was creating urgency, the stress signal that made the purchase feel necessary right now, naturally dissipates. The dopamine anticipation signal, which has a relatively short half-life, fades. And the prefrontal cortex, which was being overridden by your limbic system at the moment of impulse, slowly recovers its authority over the decision. Consumer behavior research consistently shows that between 60 and 80% of unplanned purchase decisions are abandoned after a structured waiting period. The desire doesn't disappear because you exercise discipline. It disappears because the biological trigger that created it was temporary, and you simply outlasted it. You're not fighting your instincts, you're buying them out with time. That's not willpower. That's financial engineering applied to your own nervous system. There's something else that shifts when this clicks into place. The guilt doesn't just reduce, it restructures. You stop blaming yourself for having a nervous system. You start seeing impulse spending the way a good mechanic looks at an engine warning light, not as a moral failure, but as data, information that a specific trigger was activated. And the moment you see it as data, you can build around it. Automatic transfers to a high-yield savings account that happen before your primitive brain registers the money as available. Intentional friction between your devices and your payment methods. A recognition of the patterns, the late-night scrolling, the stress-triggered purchases, the subscription creep that compounds invisibly over months. Your savings rate doesn't improve because you became a more virtuous person. It improves because you finally understood what financial discipline actually means at the neurological level, and you stopped bringing a knife to a gun fight. Here is the last thing worth sitting with. You are biologically the first generation in human history to face this exact problem at this scale. Your ancestors on the savannah never had to resist a one-click checkout at 2 a.m. delayed gratification, as a wealth-building strategy didn't exist until humans invented the concept of a future, savings accounts, compound interest, a retirement that happens 30 years from now. The fact that impulse spending is hard to interrupt is not evidence that you're failing. It's evidence that evolution hasn't caught up to the world it accidentally built. But evolution also gave you something else, a prefrontal cortex capable of understanding its own limitations. That's extraordinarily rare. Almost nothing else in nature can do that. Your primitive brain will keep trying to consume the carcass every month. That's not a character flaw. That's a survival mechanism that worked for 200,000 years and just didn't get the memo. The question is whether you're now aware enough to introduce 72 hours between the hunt and the kill. Because money, unlike anything on the savannah, doesn't rot if you leave it alone. In fact, it grows.